The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword has an extremely linear intended progression sequence. There aren't many places in which the player gets to choose the order in which they do required events. In many situations, the game heavily relies on the player taking this intended path for future progress to be possible at all. This was reflected for a long time by the game's speedrun route, as it too mostly followed the game's intended sequence of events, with the only notable deviations being the early Thunderhead and early Life Tree seedling sequence breaks. It wasn't until the discovery of reverse bit magic that speedruns finally broke out significantly from the game's linear chain. However, despite being able to break free from many constraints the game places on us, there are still some key events that stand strong and immobile against the power of reverse bit magic. These obstacles which still stand against us define what the speedrun route is today, and the most notable one of all is the Gate of Time. The Gate of Time is first seen when it rises into its closed form after Link learns the Ballad of the Goddess with Impa in the Sealed Grounds. Later on, the Gate of Time fully opens after Link obtains the Master Sword from the Fire Sanctuary and defeats the second iteration of the Imprisoned. At this point, the Gate of Time can be used to go to the past Sealed Temple, instead named the Temple of Hylia, whenever the player desires. Though there isn't much to do other than learn about some lore for the Song of the Hero quest and eventually fight the final boss. In a speedrun, once we open the Gate of Time, the run is pretty much over. Zelda upgrades us to the true Master Sword, and thanks to the Song of the Hero skip RBM, we open the door to the Horde fight with only 5 minutes of the run remaining. 5 minutes. After spending over 2 hours just to get through the Gate of Time. What we spend a majority of the run going through is all in an effort to satisfy the Gate of Time and arrive in the Temple of Hylia. The Gate of Time can only be opened after it rises out of the ground and the player has sealed the second iteration of the Imprisoned back into the sealing spike at the bottom of the Sealed Ground spiral. Being able to raise the Gate of Time requires the Harp, which in turn requires the Amber Tablet, which requires beating the Earth Temple. Defeating the second Imprisoned fight requires completing the Fire Sanctuary to activate the fight, and completing the Ancient Cistern to activate the Grucinator, else the fight will crash. Needing to beat these two temples requires their area's respective Silent Realm items, which in turn requires the proper area lair triggers, those being Ferore's Courage for Farron, and the placing of the Amber Tablet for Eldin. All of this is currently required to open the Gate of Time. If we could skip the Gate of Time, we should be able to skip all of its dependencies as well. So, how might one go about trying to skip the Gate of Time? The most popular theory for this skip is simple. Why not just use reverse bit magic to set the value for the Gate of Time being opened? It would seem at first glance that this theory should work since we can set so many other important flags with reverse bit magic already. However, the Gate of Time being open is simply not a value we can arbitrarily set using reverse bit magic. To understand why this is, we first need to understand the differences between the types of flags that Skyward Sword uses to keep track of general game progress. Skyward Sword has 3 types of flags, which serve different functions towards keeping track of how each game area should be loaded. Scene flags, temporary flags, and story flags. A scene flag is a value that keeps track of a persistent event within a specific area of the game. What this means is that the value being held by the flag should not change if the player decides to leave the area and then come back. These are events such as pushing down logs or blowing up rocks. The game obviously does not want players to find out that the rock they blew up earlier has managed to perfectly reconstruct itself when they come back. Temporary flags are basically the same thing as scene flags, except they do not have persistence between area switches, and will reset to their default state when the player leaves an area. However, they do persist through saving and reloading. Most of this game's temporary flags are simply finding a hidden rupee, fairy, or environmental item drop. The important thing to note about both scene flags and temporary flags is that their values are meant to be area specific. Each flag of these 2 types is meant to be used by one area and one area only. This is contrasted by story flags, which are values that can function as area independent and be interpreted by any number of the game's areas. For example, the Farron, Eldon, and Lanayru light pillars are all story flags, as both the Skyloft and Sky areas need to know which pillars have been opened so that their maps are visually consistent with each other. All of these types of flags can be set using reverse bit magic, but there's a key difference to how the game handles its implementation for writing new scene flags and temporary flags which story flags lack. To start with, the array of memory which holds scene flag values is partitioned into different equally sized sections, one for each defined area of the game. When an area writes a new scene flag, it does not write it directly into this array. Instead, it writes it to a separate part of memory which only keeps track of the scene flags for the currently loaded area. Once a value is written to the current scene flags, the entire contents of the current scene flags get copied into the current area's section in the scene flag array. The game keeps track of which section to write back to with a number that gets recalculated between every load to coincide with what the current area is. However, during Back in Time, we can actually hijack this number by selecting a file, as selecting a file will overwrite it with the number coinciding with the area the file is saved in. This is why reverse bit magic for scene flags is so powerful. We have the ability to write scene flag values from our current Back in Time map to the memory of the current scene flags, which are then copied into the wrong section of the scene flag array after we load a file. This allows us to set arbitrary scene flag values for any area we can save in, depending on which values we can set during Back in Time. On the contrary, when an area writes a new story flag to memory, the write is directly hard-coded to a very specific address within the array of story flags. In this array, there isn't any overall logic as to where every flag is placed, other than related flags often being grouped together somewhere. Because story flags lack this layer of indirection, using reverse bit magic to set a story flag requires performing the exact same action in Back in Time that we would perform during casual gameplay, making story flag RBMs mostly useless. And since the Gate of Time is a story flag, using reverse bit magic to open it up requires opening up the Gate of Time during Back in Time, which doesn't really help us. So, in short, no, we cannot use reverse bit magic to open up the Gate of Time early. If we ever want this theory to work out somehow, we would have to figure out some way to set arbitrary story flags that is not already known. Okay, so if that theory won't work out, then is there anything else we have to work with? Well, there might be one other possibility. The Sealed Grounds general area is split up into 3 different sub-areas: the Spiral, the Sealed Temple, and the Behind the Temple area. Each of these areas has a bird statue that the player can save at, or go to the sky with if it's outside. However, one weird property about these bird statue actors is that all 3 statues are always loaded, regardless of what the current sub-area is. So, if we're loaded in the Sealed Temple, the bird statues at the Spiral and the Behind the Temple areas are both still present and are considered to be out-of-bounds bird statues. These statues exist in a few different places throughout Skyward Sword, but their functions are a little abnormal. Specifically, if we try to fly up into the sky with any of these statues, the statues will instead attempt to send us to a different area of the game. And this phenomenon is known as wrong warping. Many of the out-of-bounds statues simply end with a crash if you try to fly to the sky with them, but one statue which does work is the Behind the Temple statue after loading into the Sealed Temple. Soaring to the sky from this out-of-bounds bird statue will instead send Link to the Temple of Hylia, as if he just went through the Gate of Time. It's quite miraculous that this possibility exists to begin with, but since it's being mentioned right now, it of course has some problems which we haven't solved. The first of these problems has to do with how loading works within the general Sealed Grounds area. While we don't have a way to clip out of the sealed grounds as a means of trying to access the out-of-bounds bird statue, we do have the ability to perform either a regular or reverse bit warp directly to the out-of-bounds coordinates where the statue is, because we can access the statue from back in time directly. However, upon performing one of these techniques, the out-of-bounds bird statue isn't here, as it's been unloaded. The unfortunate reason for this has to do solely with Link's position. When Link is positioned inside the sealed temple, the game functions as one would normally expect. However, the frame that Link leaves the confines of the sealed temple walls, all the loaded actors suddenly unload and disappear, including all the out-of-bounds bird statues. This is obviously a problem, as it prevents us from being able to access the statue we so desire. This isn't something that just happens in the sealed temple, but within any of the 3 sub-areas that make up the sealed grounds. And it seems to be something the game checks for every frame, and not something that is only checked by passing through some sort of invisible plane. This loading algorithm in the sealed grounds is somewhat strange, as it doesn't appear to be present at any other overworld location in the game, but instead only within some dungeons. As if this wasn't enough of a problem, there's still another issue which we'd have to solve if we wanted to make this work. This is an issue that's been mentioned in a couple of previous videos, and is always ominously lurking in the background, deciding whether or not our various sequence-breaking ideas will work. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the return of layers. This time, we're dealing with the sad reality of the Temple of Hylia, Layer 0. This is the layer we get sent to should we wrong warp to the Temple of Hylia. And while most actors are properly loaded on this layer, one crucial actor which is missing is the door to Hylia's realm. And without this door, it is impossible to load into the Horde fight, as the loading is tied specifically to this door being opened. There is no loading zone behind the door. The only way to make the door appear is to load the Temple of Hylia with at least Layer 1. And of course, the trigger for Layer 1 is opening the Gate of Time. And thus the situation came full circle, for the effort and toil spent by the glitch hunters did nothing more than further sink in the crushing reality they so wished to elude. The Gate of Time looked down upon those small-minded creatures and smirked, having known all along that such attempts would only add to the ever-increasing vault of bitter revelations known as Skyward Sword glitch hunting. The Gate of Time had won. Or so it may have seemed. As it turned out, the Gate of Time did not hold absolute domain over the layers in the Temple of Hylia. For the Temple of Hylia Layer 2 could be activated by completing the Skykeep dungeon. Random theatrics aside, yes, we can set Layer 2 in the Temple of Hylia by completing the Skykeep, and Layer 2 has the door to Hylia's realm loaded in properly. This means that if we could successfully wrong warp to the Temple of Hylia, the any % route would instead work towards beating the Skykeep dungeon as fast as possible. Such a route would probably be faster by a few minutes at the very least compared to the current any % route. So, despite all the efforts made by the Gate of Time to prevent us from skipping it, there's still a small hope that it may happen one day, and that it will likely be faster to do so. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the explanations and my random theatrics near the end. If you still have questions, feel free to leave them down below, and I'll try my best to answer them when I have time. Also, one more thing to add, since I've seen it asked a lot. Layer values in this game are determined solely by story flags, so being able to set arbitrary story flags wouldn't just help us with the Gate of Time. As far as speedrunning is concerned, arbitrary story flags would almost completely shatter the game. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.